بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى وبارك وسلم على سيدنا محمد ختم الأنبياء والمرسلين ووسيلتنا إلى رب العالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وقد نوينا تعلم تعليم وتذكر وتذكير نفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على خير وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah. In our discussions on Hanafi fiqh, we have been discussing different matters related to the prayer, to the salah, right? And we finished discussing the integrals of the prayer, right? And then the necessary actions of the prayer, and then the prayer as a whole. And it's important to know that the distinction between these different actions, because if something goes wrong, if someone forgets something accidentally, they know how to make up for that, right? But there are certain aspects that we need to finish. Today will be the last class, so we're going to try to cover whatever we can of them. Aspects that we need to finish today. Sorry, apologies. Just want to open the YouTube to see if there's any questions. One issue that we hope to cover is the issue of making up missed prayers. That's one. Second would be the prayer of the traveler. That's two. And third, possibly we already covered the prostration of forgetfulness, right? And then the prostration of recital, right? So we'll try to cover all of that today, inshallah ta'ala. Allah give us tawfiq. So we'll start with making up missed prayers, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran that in the salat kanat ala al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta, that the prayer is been established or has been sanctioned for the believers at an appointed, a duly appointed time, right? Kitaban mawquta, right? So the times of the prayers are they are firmly established in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? But also the order of the prayers as well, right? And we see from many different texts, right, both the Quran and both from the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, that's the order between the prayers is also obligatory. So to pray the prayers is obligatory, and to pray them in order is also obligatory, right? And we see this from the life of the Prophet ﷺ in the Battle of Khandaq, when the Battle of the Trench, that because of the fighting and because of the fear that was involved, they were not able to pray the prayer. They were not able to pray multiple prayers, right, until the Isha time came in. So they missed multiple prayers because they were busy, engaged in the fighting, right? So when the Prophet ﷺ made up those prayers, right, he made all of them up in order and then prayed Isha, right? So to pray the prayers in order, right, is an obligation in and of itself. Right, now that obligation applies between the prayers, the current prayers, as well as the missed prayers, right? So if a person, for instance, they oversleep for Fajr, they don't wake up for Fajr, right? And now it's Dhuhr time and they're about to pray Dhuhr. They have to pray Fajr first and then pray Dhuhr, right? In order for their Dhuhr to be valid, they have to pray Fajr first, right? But there are three exceptions, right? And we'll be discussing that, right? So the author says, he says, maintaining correct order, tartib, between a missed prayer and a current prescribed prayer, as well as between the missed prayers themselves, is necessary. However, this order is no longer mandatory if one of the three situations applies. So, okay. right? So for instance, someone oversleeps for Fajr, right? And they wake up, and they're calling the Iqamah for Dhuhr, right? And they get up and they pray the Dhuhr prayer. And then after they finish the Dhuhr prayer, they realize, oh wait, I didn't pray Fajr, right? So because they prayed the Dhuhr prayer unknowingly, right, not realizing that they missed the Fajr prayer, or that they had to pray the Fajr prayer first, right? Then they do not have to repeat the Dhuhr prayer, right? So one of the excuses is forgetfulness. That if you pray a prayer forgetting that you have a missed prayer due prior to that, right? Then that prayer is valid, and then you would make up the missed prayer before the next prayer, right? But if you remember mid prayer, during the Dhuhr prayer, right, while you're praying, you realize, oh, wait, I have to pray Fajr, right? Then you have to break the Dhuhr prayer, pray the Fajr prayer, and then try to read, and then pray the Dhuhr prayer, even if you miss the congregation. Okay. So one excuse is forgetfulness. So if you pray forgetful that you have another prayer due, right, then that is excused, right? Then the order is lifted, right? So, right, and this happens as well, right? If a person misses the witr prayer as well, right, and then they wake up and they pray Fajr, and then they realize after having prayed Fajr that they didn't pray the witr prayer, right? Then the Fajr is still valid, right? The Fajr is valid. But if they realize before or during the Fajr prayer, right, then the Fajr prayer is not valid, right? And they have to pray the witr prayer first, and then re-pray the Fajr prayer, right? Unless the time of the Fajr prayer is going to go out, right? So that's the second excuse. He says, if the recommended time of the current prescribed prayer is about to expire, in which case one prays the current prescribed prayer before making up the missed prayer. Okay, so for instance, you ended up forgetting to pray witr prayer, right? And you fell asleep after Isha, and you didn't pray the witr prayer, right? You wake up, there's only 5 minutes left of Fajr, right? So if you were to busy yourself by praying the witr prayer, you might also miss Fajr as well, right? So in that situation, you will not pray the witr prayer, you will just pray the Fajr, and then once the sun fully rises, then you will pray the witr, right? Right. So because there's no point in trying to make up another prayer, which causes you to miss a current prayer, right? Right. And this regards to the recommended time, right? Not the whole entire time, right? So for instance, if you didn't pray Dhuhr for some reason, right? And now Asr time is about, right? And Asr time is in, right? And then Asr is just about to become into the disliked time, when the sun's light diminishes and starts to become yellow, which is just before Maghrib, about 20 minutes before Maghrib. That time is about to come in. Right? So that's a disliked time. The recommended time is to pray just before that. So if your recommended time is going to go out, if you were to busy yourself praying Dhuhr, then you pray the Asr first and then pray the Dhuhr. Right? So that's the second excuse. So one is that if you forgot that you had a missed prayer and you already completely prayed the current prayer, then that's valid, right? Or if you fear that you're reasonably sure that if you busy yourself making up the missed prayer, right, that you will miss the time or the recommended time of the current prayer, then you pray the current prayer first and then make up the other prayer, right? And the third is if the amounts of missed prayers that you have, right, right, becomes 6 or more, then you are no longer obliged to follow the order, right? Because once the prayers become 6 or more, then it becomes unduly difficult for someone to pray all of those up in order, right? And we mentioned the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ was busied away from being able to pray, and it was not 6 prayers, there was only a certain amount of prayers. Right, so 6 prayers would be a repetition. So Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, another Fajr. Right, so once it becomes 6 prayers, 6 obligatory prayers, right? So the witr is not counted in the 6, even though it is obligatory to do the order, to keep the order with witr as well. So Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, right? And witr is the order. right? But if you have more than six, if you have six or more obligatory prayers, right, that you owe, then you do not have to pray them in order.
Get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, Siri. Right, so you don't have to pray them in order. Right, so for instance, if a person didn't pray in a certain time period of their life, right, they had a down, right, they had a certain period of their life where they thought they didn't pray, right, and they made tawbah, but they have missed prayers. They have those missed prayers, right? So because those missed prayers are likely to be six or more prayers, then it will not affect their current prayers. And when they make up those missed prayers, they don't have to do them in order. Right? So you don't have to do, right, Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha of the first day, Fajr, Dhuhr, Maghrib, Asr, Maghrib, Isha of the second day. You can pray all your Fajrs first, and then all your Dhuhrs, then all your Asrs, and then so on. You can pray them, make them up however you wish. Right? If a person doesn't specifically know how many prayers they missed, right, then they will estimate to the best of their ability, right, to where they're reasonably sure that this number covers the amount of prayers that I would have missed in that time period. Right? And then, right, act accordingly. Some would say that you can even add a bit more just for certainty. Right, so those are the three excuses that if the time is going of the current prayer is going to go out, if you were to busy yourself performing the missed prayer first, you would miss the time of the current prayer, or the recommended time of the current prayer. Right. The second is if you pray the current prayer, forgetting that you have a missed prayer, you prayed the full entire current prayer, forgetting that you had the missed prayer. And then the third is that if your missed prayers, excluding the witr, right, just the five obligatory prayers, if the missed prayers become six or more, right, then you no longer have to pray in order, right? Meaning you don't have to make up the missed prayers in order, right? And you can continue to pray your current prayers, right, even though you have missed prayers on you, right? So those are the three exceptions to the rule. Now, if a person had, say, for instance, 20 missed prayers, right, they are no longer obliged to follow the order of the missed prayers, between the missed prayers, right, because they're six and more. They're more than six. Right, but once they, if they slowly start to make up the prayers, and it gets back down to six or lower, right, they still don't have to follow the order, right? But if it gets to zero, they made up all of their missed prayers. So now, right, the majority opinion is that they now have to, they are now obliged to follow the order. So if they were to miss another prayer after that, so for instance, Zubair missed 20 prayers when he was younger. Right, it was a time of his life where he was distracted, and he had bad friends, and he didn't pray. Right, so he missed 20 prayers. Right, so he makes tawbah, he repents to Allah, and he goes to make up the 20 prayers. Right, he makes up 19 prayers. Right, he still doesn't have to follow the order in the making up the prayers. Right, but once he makes up that 20th prayer and he has 0 prayers, right, due, he has 0 missed prayers left. Now he has to follow the order. So at the night after he made up his 20th prayer, he overslept and he missed Fajr. It wasn't his fault. He set his alarm. He did everything possible. He slept early. He just didn't wake up. So he's not sinful for it, right? Because there's no negligence involved, right? But he missed the Fajr prayer. Now, in order for him to pray Dhuhr, he has to pray Fajr first, because his missed prayers are now back to 0. Right? He starts over, and just like normal, and he's obliged to follow the order between the missed prayers and the current prayers. Right? So he has to pray Fajr before the Dhuhr prayer comes, unless the other 2 excuses apply, that he prayed Dhuhr and he forgot about Fajr, or the time of Dhuhr is going to go out if he busies himself praying Fajr. Right? And so I hope that's clear. If there are any questions, you can just post them, and we'll take them as we go, inshallah. So that, in essence, that's the end of that chapter. Right now, when making up the prayers, right? And for any obligatory prayer, we mentioned that that one of the obligations is the intention, right? So if you're praying an obligatory prayer or a witr prayer, you have to not only intend that you're praying, right, but you have to intend the specific prayer that you're praying, right? So I'm praying Isha, I'm praying Dhuhr, I'm praying Maghrib, I'm praying witr, right? You can't just say I'm praying Allahu Akbar and without any acknowledgement of which prayer you're praying, right? As opposed to the sunnah prayer, you can just say I'm praying. You don't have to specify the sunnah prayer, right? But if you're making up an obligatory prayer or a witr prayer, you also have to specify the prayer and when that prayer was obligatory, right? So I'm making up the fajr of yesterday. I'm making up the asr of yesterday, right? So you have to be specific. Now the problem is that could be very difficult for someone who missed a lot of prayers when they were younger, right? Someone has a lot. If someone missed one prayer yesterday, it's not that difficult. They know, as long as they know in their heart which prayer that they're praying, then that suffices for their intention, that they know it is from yesterday, right? They don't have to say it, right? But if someone missed 100 prayers or they didn't pray for 2 or 3 months when they were younger, it would be very almost impossible for them to specify the exact date of each prayer, right? So the scholars, they have given an easy way out, that one person makes up their prayers. They would say that I am praying the last dhuhr that ever became obligatory on me and I didn't pray it, right? So I'm praying the last dhuhr that I owe, right? The last dhuhr that I owe, or I'm praying the first dhuhr that I owe, right? So after you pray that salat, that dhuhr is off, right? And then you say again, I'm praying the first dhuhr that I owe, right? So because since that one fell off, the next one takes its place, right, as the first dhuhr, right? Right. So that's sufficient, right? So if somebody owes 200 dhuhrs, 200 asrs, 200 maghribs, 200 ishas, they can just say, I'm praying the first dhuhr that is obligatory on me that I haven't prayed. I'm praying the first makeup dhuhr that I owe, right? And then just continue like that until all the dhuhrs are finished, right? Same thing with isha. Right? So that's an easier way out. It's still a specification, but it's not as difficult as mentioning the exact dates and time, right? If there are any questions on that, then we can take that. But we're going to move on to the emphasized sunnah prayers. Actually, we're going to take the prayer of the traveler first, because this is very common, right? And this has to do with the obligatory prayers, so we'll take that first before the sunnah prayers, right? So the prayer of the traveler, when a person is traveling, and we'll talk about what the specific limits of that are, right? Then there is a dispensation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, right, for multiple things, right? That for the traveler, it is not obligatory to pray Jum'ah. It is not obligatory to pray the Eid prayer. It is not obligatory to fast in Ramadan, right? If a person was already traveling before the day came in, right? And a person shortens their any 4 rakat prayer to 2 rakats, right? Okay. But that's only if a person is a traveler, right? In order to be a traveler, you have to have 2 specific things. You have to have 1, an intention to travel, and 2, you have to actually initiate the travel itself, right? Actually initiate the travel itself. So just by an intention, so I'm sitting at my home, I intend to travel. Can I shorten my prayer? No, right? Because I'm still at home, right? How about if I get in a car and just start driving? I have no intention to go anywhere. I have no intention to travel. I have no intention to go to any specific distance. Right? Also, I'm not a traveler, right? I have to have both an intention and I have to initiate the journey, right? What is the intention? That my intention should be that I'm going to a place, a destination that is at least, 48 miles or 77 kilometers away, right? That I'm going to, for instance, someone is in New York and they say, okay, I'm going to Buffalo, New York, right? and it happens to be that Buffalo, New York is far away, more than 77 kilometers, or if you're in America, 48 miles, right? If your destination is 48 miles or more, or 77 kilometers or more, right? And you intend to go to that place, and that is considered a journey. That is considered a travel, right? The sufficient length of a travel, right? But you're not considered to the rulings of the traveler do not apply to you until you leave your city limits, right? So the person he lives in New York City, in Manhattan, right? He's intending to go to Albany, New York, which is right, or Buffalo, New York, which is far north New York State, right? That is a sufficient distance for him to be a traveler, right? But he is not considered a traveler until he leaves New York City, and so he leaves the city limits of his city. Right, so once he leaves those city limits, he will pray 2 rakats instead of 4. Right? He will pray 2 rakats instead of 4, and he does not have to fast. Right? He does not have to, even though he hasn't reached his destination yet. But as soon as he leaves the city limits and his destination is that distance, then he is allowed to shorten. He must shorten his 4 rakat prayers into 2 rakats. Okay. Now, the reason why we say must shorten is because, unlike other schools, the dispensation for the traveler to shorten their prayers is not a choice. Right? It is not that you can pray the 4 prayers, or you can pray 2 if you want. No, right? The obligation is 2 prayers. It's two rakats. So for Dhuhr, Asr, and Isha, it's 2 rakats. Right? There is no option to pray the 4 rakats. However, if a person did pray the 4, right, the 4 rakats, right, as long as they sat for the first sitting, the length of time that it takes to say the tashahhud, right, then the prayer is valid. Their prayer, the first 2 rakats will be considered their fard, their obligatory prayer, and the last 2 rakats will just be considered a voluntary prayer added to it. Right. The reason why we say that you have to sit in the first sitting is because the obligation of dhuhr for the traveler is 2 rakats. So the end of that 2 rakats, that is the last sitting for them, for their obligatory prayer. That's the last sitting, and the last sitting is obligatory, right? Even though they stand up and they erroneously stand up and pray 2 more rakats, right? Those are considered nafil, extra. So the end of the fard is the 2nd rakat. So that sitting is obligatory. If they, for instance, if they prayed dhuhr, and they prayed 4 rakats, but they never sat at the end of the 2, right? None of it's valid. The whole prayer is considered voluntary, right? And it's not considered to suffice for the obligation of dhuhr, right? So this is what's called a rukhsa majaziyah, hypothetical or a metaphorical dispensation. That there is a lessening of the burden of praying, right, of the 4 rakats, right? But it's not a choice. It's not that you have a choice between 4 and 2, right? The prayer is 2 rakats, right? And that's important to know. Many people, right? However, if you are traveling, right, and for dhuhr prayer, you go to the masjid, right? Now the imam is a local; he's a resident, so his obligatory prayer of dhuhr is 4 rakats. And you're praying behind him, right? In that situation, you have to pray 4 rakats. If you're praying behind an imam who's local, right, then your obligation is to follow the imam, right? And because you chose to follow the imam, as soon as you enter the prayer, your dhuhr becomes 4 rakats, right? So for instance, Zubair, he's on his way to Buffalo, New York. So he leaves the New York City limits. Right? He's out of the city, and he becomes a traveler, right? So he prays his fajr on the road, right? Then he travels a little bit more, and then he gets to a small town. He finds a little masjid, a nice masjid. So he goes for dhuhr. He walks in the masjid, and the imam has already finished the first rakat of dhuhr. So he catches the dhuhr late, right? So he prays the entire prayer with the imam, right? The imam makes salam, he has to stand up and make another prayer, right? Even though he already prayed at least two with the imam, right? So by entering the prayer of the imam, his obligatory prayer becomes 4 rakats, not 2. Right? If he prayed by himself, he has to pray 2. So, what would the definition of a city be? Is it just according to what we define as cities now? Generally, when they mention the city limits, that they would say that you traverse the last portion where the buildings of the city are, and then after that is outskirts. Right? After that is like the suburbs, you can say. Right? However, in many modern developed countries, there's not really this tangible difference between where this city stops and the next city enters. Right? So we would suffice with just the city lines that are stipulated, even if a person lives in the suburbs. Right? So if someone lives in, for instance, Mississauga, Ontario, which is a type of a suburb, it's near Toronto, right? And once they leave, right, you see the signs that says "Welcome to Burlington" or "Welcome to Hamilton," the next city, the next town, right? Then that's sufficient, right? Otherwise, right, the old, the way that the Arabs, the earlier peoples would have seen it, right? They would have a city, they would have an outskirts where they would have farms and these things, and then they would have like a kind of an open land, and then another city you would enter. Right, so we don't have that now, so the city lines are sufficient. Right, so if you're in a place that's called a different city now, then you can start your travel. Right, so the traveler, their 4 rakat prayers are now only 2. They have to pray 2, unless they're praying behind an imam who is a local. Then it becomes 4. Right, so if we were to change the Zubair's scenario, right, that Zubair is a traveler, right? He prayed his fajr on the road, right? He travels a little bit more, and he gets to this nice little quaint masjid in some small city, right? And he sees that they're in the tashahhud of Dhuhr prayer. Imam's about to make the salam, right? So he joins the prayer and he sits with the imam. So he is considered a follower of the imam, even though he didn't pray a single full rakat with the imam. He's considered a follower of the imam, right? So when the imam makes salam, when he stands up, how many prayers does he make? Does he make 2 rakats or 4 rakats? Right? For those who are watching online, if you're quick enough, you can throw on the answer, right? Zubair only caught the final sitting with the imam, right? So now he has to stand up and he has to make up what he missed of the prayer, right? Does he pray 2 rakats because he's a traveler, or does he pray 4 rakats because he's following the imam? I'll give 2 seconds. 1,000, 2, 1,000. Right. So the answer is that they will pray 4 rakats, right? Because as soon as he enters into the prayer of the imam, right, the obligation of following the imam's prayer, right, supersedes the obligation of praying 2 rakats. Right. However, if Zubair becomes the imam, right, so he comes in the masjid, this quaint little town, just as they're calling the iqamah, and the imam, they see that Zubair is, mashallah, has a turban, he has this nice beard and his long thobe, right? So they think that he's a scholar, so they put him to the front and they say, you lead, right? So now Zubair is the imam and everyone else is following his prayer. He has to pray 2 rakats, right? And it is and after his salam of the 2 rakats, he will tell the people that I'm a traveler, complete your prayers, another 2 rakats. It is recommended to do that before the prayer started, so that, right, so when Zubair gets the microphone to lead the prayer, he should say, excuse me, everyone, I'm a traveler. So after I finish my 2 rakats, stand up and finish your 2 extra rakats. Perfect. Right now, until when is Zubair considered a traveler? Right. So during the journey between when he left the limits of New York City and before he reaches Buffalo, right, he is definitely a traveler. Now, when he reaches Buffalo, he is still a traveler unless he intends to stay in Buffalo for 15 days or more than 15 days, sorry. Right? If he intends to stay in Buffalo for 15 days or more, he's considered a temporary resident and he is not considered a traveler. right? But if his intention to stay in Buffalo is just a few days, right, or is less than 15 days, right, then he is considered a traveler, even though he's there, he's sleeping in a certain place, he has a certain place to stay, he's got a nice B&B, or right. Then even in that situation, he is still a traveler, right? As long as his intention to stay there is not 15 days or more. Okay. So now Zubair is in Buffalo visiting some friends, right? His college friends. He's only there for 10 days, right? So he's still a traveler, right? And now, right after the 10 days, he decides to come back home to New York City, right? So he's a traveler along the whole path until he enters the limits of New York City. Once he enters the city limits, he sees the sign that says "Welcome to New York City," right? Then he is no longer a traveler. So once he returns back to his home, he is no longer a traveler again. Right? Another situation that he no longer becomes a traveler is that he goes to Buffalo, right? He's originally only intending to be there for 10 days, so he's a traveler. But then, right, somebody offers him to get married to their daughter, and he says, yes, I'll stay, right? When's the wedding? Next month. You have to stay until then, right? So now his intention, right, that now technically he plans to be there for more than 15 days, right? So he at the moment, he's no longer a traveler, right? So as soon as the intention is made to stay in any place for 15 days or more, then one is no longer a traveler. Okay, from right, and the ruling of him being a traveler, right, depends on the end of the time, right? So for instance, Zubair, he has a flight, right, from New York airport to Vancouver, Canada, right? So he wakes up late, right? And he, instead of praying Fajr, right, he rushes to the airport, and then right, just before the Fajr prayer time exited, right, he's in his plane. He already left the limits of New York City, right? They flew over the next neighboring city, right? So at the time that Fajr came in, right? At the time that Fajr that he left the city, Fajr was still in. So that Fajr is obligatory, right, on him as a traveler, or even though Fajr doesn't change to 2 rakats, right? So right, the consideration is the last portion of time of that prayer. At the end of that prayer, when that prayer was about to go out, were they a traveler or were they a resident? And that's important. Somebody returns from journey, for instance, right? They're driving back from Buffalo, Dhuhr time's in, but they know they have still another 3 hours until Asr, right? And they plan to be in the city limits of New York within 1 hour, right? So even though Dhuhr was obligatory on them as a traveler, as soon as they enter their city limits, right, they have to pray Dhuhr 4 rakats. They can't say that, oh, well, when Dhuhr came in, I was a traveler, so let me just pray 2 rakats now. No, right? When Dhuhr came in, when they entered the city limits, Dhuhr time was still in, and they are considered a local. Now, if a prayer is missed during a travel, right, it is made up as the prayer of a traveler, even if you're at home, right? So the day before before Zubair returns back to New York City, right, he missed the Dhuhr prayer. For some reason, they were, his future in-laws busied him with something, and he completely forgot and he didn't pray Dhuhr. Right, but then he returns back to New York City before Asr. Right, so now he's like, okay, I need to make up my Dhuhr prayer. How many rakats do I pray Dhuhr? Because I missed Dhuhr prayer as a traveler, right? And now I'm home, I'm a resident, and I want to make it up, right? So however they missed it, if they missed it as a traveler, they make it up as a traveler, they make it up 2 rakats, right? Even if they're making it up at home as a resident. Same thing applies that the day that Zubair wants to leave New York City to go to Buffalo, right? He missed Dhuhr. He was packing his bags and everything and getting the car ready. He completely forgot. He missed Dhuhr, right? But then he said, you know what? I'll pray Dhuhr when I get there. So he drives, he gets there, right, at Asr time, right? Right. So he goes to pray his Dhuhr first before the Asr because he knows that it's obligatory to keep track of the order of the prayers before between the missed prayers and the current prayer. So he prays Dhuhr first, but then he thinks to himself, wait, when I missed the Dhuhr prayer, I was a resident. So that was, right, which means I should pray 4 rakats. But now I'm a traveler. Right? Should I pray 2 rakats? Right. So the rule is that he will make up the prayer the way that it was missed. When he missed it, what was he? A traveler or was he a resident? When he missed it, he was a resident. So he will pray 4 rakats to make up the Dhuhr prayer, even though he is now a traveler, because once the time of the prayer goes out, the prayer is locked. Right? It is locked in. However, it was obligatory at that time. So once he missed it as a local, right, the Dhuhr prayer is locked in as a missed prayer, 4 rakats. No matter where you make that up, it's still going to be 4 rakats. The opposite is also true. Right, so I think that covers most of the chapter of the traveler, right? And it's an important traveler. It's an important chapter to really get one's head around and to understand, because it has a lot of implications, right? Okay. Right, so the distance is 48 miles and 77 kilometers, right? Just to recap, that one intends to travel to a place that is at least 48 miles or 77 kilometers away, and they leave the same city limits, their own city limits, wherever they live. Once they pass the city limits, they are considered a traveler until they, right, all the way up until they reach, and they are still a traveler even when they reach, as long as their intention is not to stay there for 15 days or more. Right. So, okay. Next, we want to move on. Right. Kind of moving fast. I apologize, but this is the last class. We want to try to squeeze in as best as we can what we always missed. Right. So the next thing we want to talk about is the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ regarding prayers. Which prayers were Sunnah prayers? Right. So we've been discussing the obligatory prayers, the 5 obligatory prayers. Also, an additional necessary prayer, the witr prayer, which is a type of obligation, right? Even though other schools consider it to be an emphasized sunnah that should not be left, but not obligatory to do. Right? But there are emphasized sunnah prayers in the Hanafi school. There are 12 emphasized sunnah prayers, right? And these are prayers that the Prophet ﷺ would do constantly, and he would rarely leave them unless he had an excuse, right? So the most emphasized of them is the two sunnah prayers before, the two rakats before Fajr prayer. The 2 rakats before Fajr prayer, right? Some scholars said that this prayer is so emphasized that a person should not pray them sitting, because even though it is permissible to pray any sunnah prayers sitting, because this is so emphasized, it's treated more like it's a necessary prayer than it is a sunnah. Right? So it's better not to sit out of caution that it could be, right, that it's more emphasized than just the sunnah. Right? The Prophet would never leave this prayer even if he was traveling. He would never leave the sunnah prayer even if he's traveling. The sunnah before Fajr. And he said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that the 2 rakats before Fajr are more beloved to me than everything the sun rises on. Right, and is also narrated that when he was as a traveler, he would not pray these 2 rakats before Fajr while riding on his camel. Right, he would not pray on the camel, even though he would pray his sunnah prayers on his camel, right, for other sunnahs, but not the Fajr prayer. He would come down, get down, and then pray. So that's the most emphasized. So 2 rakats before Fajr, right? 4 rakats before Dhuhr, 2 rakats after Dhuhr, 2 rakats after Maghrib, and 2 rakats after Isha. Right, so that's a total of 12 prayers. A total of 12 prayers. Right, so just to recap once more, right? The most emphasized, the 2 rakats before Fajr. Right, then after that, the 4 rakats before Dhuhr, then 2 rakats after Dhuhr, then 2 rakats after Maghrib, then 2 rakats after Isha. Those are the emphasized Sunnah prayers. Now we mentioned that leaving an emphasized Sunnah prayer, right, is without excuse is blameworthy, but it's not sinful. However, if it becomes habitual, that a person constantly doesn't pray the Sunnah prayers, and these specific 12 that I mentioned, that because they're emphasized Sunnahs, if they constantly leave them out without excuse, right, then it will become sinful. Right? It's makruh tahriman. It's prohibitively disliked. Right? To habitually leave these emphasized Sunnah prayers without excuse. Right now, if here and there a person has an excuse, right, they are late for work or this or that, right, then they can miss the prayer, right, as long as it doesn't become a habit. So, right, other than that, there are recommended Sunnah prayers, or there are non-emphasized Sunnah prayers, which would be the 4 rakats before Asr. The Prophet said, "Rahimallahu imra'an salla qabla al-asri arba'an." Right? That may Allah have mercy on the person who prays 4 rakats before Asr. Right? 4 rakats before Isha prayer is also a non-emphasized Sunnah, meaning the Prophet would do it sometimes and he would leave it sometimes. And the 4 rakats after Isha, meaning the 2, right? Adding 2 to the already emphasized 2, right? So adding an additional 2 after Isha is recommended, right? And then 6 rakats after Maghrib with 3 sets of salams. Right? That's the best way to pray. So to pray 2, 2, 2 after Maghrib. The first 2 are emphasized, right? But to add another 2 after it, another 2 prayers after it, is considered what's called Salatul Awwabin, right? The prayer of the penitents, those who make tawbah. Right? And the Prophet said that whoever prays after Maghrib 6, maybe 6 rakats, right, and does not speak in between them anything of worldly talk, right, then those 6 rakats are equal to 12 years of worship. Those 6 rakats are equal to 12 years of worship. Right, so generally, in many places, especially in Talim, right, they do not leave the 6 rakats. All of the students, all of the teachers, they pray the 6 rakats every day, right, without fail, because these are what they call the nafahat of Allah, the divine gusts of wind that Allah has blessed the ummah with, right? And they are commanded to try to take advantage of them as best as possible. So, other non-emphasized Sunnah prayers are the 2 rakats for greeting the masjid, greeting the mosque, the tahiyyat al-masjid. Right, it's best to perform before sitting down, but if one sat down first, right, they still have an opportunity to pray it. So it's not missed. It's not, the opportunity is not lost if they sit down. Right. For instance, if a person comes in the masjid, right, and it's after Asr time, right, they're not allowed to pray in that time because it's a disliked time, right? So they sit down, right, and then they stand up and they sit there and they read Quran until Maghrib comes in. They pray the Maghrib prayer, right? That Maghrib prayer would suffice for the greeting of the masjid, right? So any prayer that is prayed, right, upon entering the masjid is, right, fulfills the sunnah of the greeting of the masjid. So if you come in the masjid before Fajr and you're going to pray your 2 rakats of Fajr sunnahs anyway, right, then that suffices, right? That 2 rakats suffices for the 2 rakats of emphasized sunnah of Fajr and for the non-emphasized sunnah of greeting the masjid. So, 2 rakats after performing wudu, right, is a neglected sunnah, right? And it is to pray the 2 rakats after performing wudu before the time it takes for the limbs to normally dry, right, if one did not already dry them. Okay, so one last topic that we wanted to cover is the prostration of recitation, the prostration of recital, which is sajdatul tilawa. So there are certain places in the Quran where there's a verse where Allah commands either directly or indirectly the believers to prostrate. Right? This prostration is necessary for the one who recites the verse and for the one who hears the verse being recited, whether they intended or not. So there are 14 specific places. Right? There are 14 specific places. There is a verse in Surah Al-A'raf, there's a verse in Surah Al-Ra'd, and generally you'll see that there's a line put under the verse or above the verse. Right? Surah Nahl, Surah Isra, Surah Maryam, and Surah Al-Hajj. Now, Surah Al-Hajj, you'll find that there's 2 places where there are lines under or above a certain word. Right? In the Hanafi school, only the first one is considered necessary to prostrate. Right? The first one, which is a few pages in, not the last one. The second one, which is on the last page, right? I believe it says, "Usjudu warka'u wasjudu waf'alul khair la'allakum tuflihun." Right? To that, something of that nature. Right? That second one is not considered, right, in the Hanafi school to be a verse of prostration, right? Because when Allah mentions, right, to bow and to prostrate, right, that means to pray a whole prayer. Not, you don't have to. It's not obligatory, but it's not a command to prostrate. Right? And so the first one of Surah Al-Hajj, right, Surah Furqan, Surah Naml, Surah Sajda itself, right, that's why what's called Sajda. Right? Surah Sad, Surah Fussilat, Surah Najm, Surah Inshiqaq, right, Iqra, right, so the last verse of Iqra, Surah Alaq, right, right, sorry, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, خلق الإنسان من علق, right, Surah Alaq. Okay, so right, so the obligation is on the person who recites it and the person who hears it being recited. Right? If it is recited in the prayer, right, then it is necessary to prostrate right away in that prayer. Right? So if the imam is reciting it, right, or a person is praying by themselves and they read Surah Iqra and they get to the last verse, right, then after reading that verse, they immediately prostrate and then they come back to standing, and is recommended to read a little bit more after that, so like Surah Ikhlas or something, and then go into the ruku'. Okay, so if one is reading outside of the prayer, they're sitting down in the masjid and reading, then it is necessary to make the prostration, but it's not necessary to do it immediately. Right? So if one wants to continue their recitation, they can, and then make the prostration later. Right? Or if a person is, for instance, reading after the Fajr prayer, right, then they would not prostrate in that time or any disliked time, like after the Fajr prayer until the sun has fully risen, right, after the Asr prayer until Maghrib comes in, right, and just before Dhuhr prayer when the sun is at its zenith, right, those times we will not prostrate. We will wait until those times are over and then prostrate to make up for the obligation. Right, so it's an obligation, but it's not an immediate obligation. Okay, so there are many chapters remaining. Due to the lack of time, we've merely chosen the most pertinent of the chapters and tried to explain the issues that are most common as well, and we hope that that proves beneficial for everyone. But in general, seeking knowledge is not just something you can do in 40 days. Right? It's not just something that is meant you can by taking just one class, right, or a few classes. Right? It's a life journey to seek knowledge, right? And hopefully that these few classes can be a catalyst to one setting off on that journey, right? But one should try to have, right, some connection to furthering their knowledge, right? Both of their Islamic beliefs. I know you're taking the classes with Sheikh Muhammad Taysir Safi, who's very qualified in Islamic beliefs, but their Islamic law as well, right? Which includes the worships, which also includes um, other matters as well, right? And the obligations of the heart, the sciences of the heart, spirituality, right? Those are personally obligatory knowledge for everyone. And the Prophet ﷺ said, seeking knowledge is obligatory on every Muslim, right? And that knowledge which is obligatory is the knowledge to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants in accordance to your situation, right? What does Allah want from you in every moment of your life and in every dealing that you do and in every interaction that you make, whether it be your own personal worship or your interactions with others on the basis of money transactions or, right, or fulfilling their rights, right? And that obligation applies to the inward as well. What is your obligation of your heart, right, in regards to your worship, in regards to your dealings with others, in regards to how you think of other people, right, and how you treat other people, right? So, and the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever sets off on a path seeking therein knowledge, then Allah will make easy for them a path to paradise. Right? And it is important to know that knowledge is not the goal. Right? Knowledge is not the goal. Allah is the goal. Right? But there is no way to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without knowledge. Right? And there's no way, even if one has knowledge, to reach Allah without acting on that knowledge. Right? And so knowledge, إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ لِلْعَمَلِ بِهِ. The whole point of the knowledge is to act on it, to transform oneself, that everything we learn, we implement until we emulate the beloved Prophet ﷺ, and that all of our actions are under the scope of Allah's pleasure. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless the people of this dawrah, those who helped to establish it and those who helped to support it and those who helped who shared it and who participated in it, those who studied and those who listened, those who watched the videos, and those who had intentions to go to Tarim physically but were not able. May Allah make this dawrah a means of blessing for the ummah and a means of mercy for the ummah and a means of relieving the ummah of its difficulties. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us deep understanding of His religion and to give us the tawfiq and the divine facilitation to act on that knowledge. And we ask Allah to purify our hearts so that our hearts are salim and pure, and we come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and He is pleased to meet us. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. If there are any questions, we have 4 minutes left. We can take any questions. If not, then we can make the istidaa. الفاتحة بين قبول وقلال وصفنها من نقاشنا بالرحمة المغفور وإلى عن بركة هذه الدروس يزكينا بها النفوس ويقربنا بالرب القدوس ويدخل السرور على الشيخ ونتبعون بسر فاتي إلى حضرة النبي. الفاتحة. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.